Monstera time! Let me show you all of my plants and give you my grow tips for growing them big and strong. Hello, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, my name is Rose, my pronouns are she, her, and today we're going to talk all about Monstera. Important to know is that I only have a few Monstera, specific types as well. I love DELICIOSA. There are so many more Monstera. There's so many very distinctly shaped fenestrated leaves that I just never really got into. No offense to anyone who does like them, but the collection that I'm going to show you is very limited, and my knowledge about them is also focused on the plants that I do own, not on all Monstera. So keep that in mind. Quick warning, these videos are always kind of chaotic. I go from the here to there, but in the description I have timestamps. So if you're looking for something specific, look in there and you can click right to the answer that you're looking for. I hope that helps. I wanted to include some more basic facts as well for people who are new to these plants. They are part of the aroid family, Auraceae in botanical terms, and they are epiphytes. I struggled a bit with explaining this while I was filming, so I've looked up the meaning on Wikipedia. An epiphyte is a plant that grows on the surface of another plant and derives its moisture and nutrients from the air and or rain. So the roots are not always just in the soil. They're actually on, for example, tree bark, and then a rainfall comes and it waters down the tree. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about soil and watering. But first of all, let me start by showing you some plants. Actually, I brought almost all of my Monstera here with me. There's just one that is growing in my terrarium that I can't bring here. It is a Monstera SILTEPECANA, and it's had quite a few issues. At first it got too little light at the bottom, then it got huge thrips infestation, so I cut it back. I'll just show you that now and then we'll skip that for the rest of the tour. Since I'm sitting here in my south-facing window, let's talk about light first, because I give my Monstera so much light compared to what I think people think is normal. Keep in mind that I'm in the Netherlands and it is a very gloomy day today, so that's why you don't see sunlight on my face. It's actually perfect for filming. But just over here is my windowsill, like right here. Can you hear it? That is my south-facing windowsill, and that is where most of my big Monstera live. Like FERRY and Thijs, the Thai constellation, they get a lot of light. This is my measuring tool. I can measure it, of course, in gloomy light like it is today. Then it is about 270, so not a lot. Today it is sunny, so I'm just measuring for you guys. Hold 5,000. And they've thrived on that. I'm not saying they need 6,000, but they can take it, especially if you slowly build them up to it. Sometimes people say that full sun will burn the leaves. I have not seen that happen at all. I did slowly get my plants used to it. So I moved them here first in winter to get a little bit more light, and then I left them there, so it slowly got more and more bright. Some of my other ones grow under grow lights. For example, here under the Aspect Soltec grow light corner that I have, both my yellow variegated plants live here. This Monstera yellow variegated Deliciosa. In this corner, I measured between 250 and 500 foot candle, and I actually realized that that is quite low for the yellow variegated Deliciosa, so I'm gonna be moving that to a different spot. To be clear, the grow light itself does give off a lot of light, but the plant was hidden behind other plants and too far away from it. And as you can see, it's not getting a lot of yellow variegation. There's just a little bit on the corner there and then at the tip of the leaf, but not as much as some of the older leaves, which of course I would like to get back. I also have south-facing windows upstairs. That's where some of the Monstera live. And then I have some smaller ones on the Hoya shelves where I've measured between 50 for the OBLIQUA, so quite low, to 300, a little bit closer to the light. If you want to try the grow lights by Soltec, they're very high quality and beautiful. You can use my code PLANTWITHROSE for a discount. That was very technical. Mainly, I would say Monstera can take more light than you would expect maybe, and it might help them grow faster and bigger quicker. One of the questions I got was how to help increase variegation. This is not a tested fact. This is just a theory. If your plant is getting too variegated, you can pull it back away from the light. Less light will give it more green. Or the other way, like this one, you can give it a little bit more light and see if that gives it more variegation. And that is interesting to test with. Let me show you one that needs a little bit less. We're going all over the place actually. I wanted to start with a nice orderly light, pots, soil, watering, but no, we're talking about variegation already. So this is one of my yellow variegated ADANSONII that is super variegated, and what happens with fully variegated leaves is that they easily brown and crisp, because only the green part of the plant brings the plant photosynthesis, which is how the plant gets nutrients and food and, I don't know, energy to live, basically. And so anything that doesn't help with that can be discarded. I'm not a botanist, I'm just a hobbyist, and I hope you keep that in mind with all my tips. So these two are both fully yellow, but like I can see here, actually, this newest leaf is starting to show some green again. But if it's more than 3 leaves that are white or yellow, fully variegated, then you can chop it back to hopefully get back to some green. And the same thing goes if your plant is hardly variegated at all. You can cut it back a little bit to a point where you see still the variegation. And the best would be if you see the variegation go over the node, over the growth point that you can point out, then your chances are the highest to get variegation back into your plant. And same with the green, actually, if you cut this back to where there is some green on the growth point, that should help to get it some healthy green again and be happy plants again, because this one looks very, very sad. And variegation also has to do with genes. So if you look at the stem, if there's great white in there, like you see with FERRY, it looks like a candy stick, so much variegation in there, then the chances are much higher of getting beautiful variegation. If your stem is mostly green, then the genes are not necessarily good. It can definitely increase. You never know. It's always a gamble, which is why I enjoy growing variegated plants so much. Every new leaf is a surprise. You never know what you're going to get, but it definitely helps to predict your chances if you look at the stem a little bit closer before buying. And the growth point, not just the stem, but the growth point. We're really going, like, this is the last thing on my list to tell you. Anyway, one question I always get is, how can I prevent the browning? First of all, you can't really prevent it. It is just logical. The plant doesn't need this part, so it often throws it away. There are some theories about maybe good conditions, especially steady conditions, I feel like, so no stress for the plant. And also maybe they've said higher humidity can help to make the browning go slower. For me, it's been very all over the place. I'll show you some plants with some browning. I feel like you can't really control it, but at the same time, I do live in a house that is currently between 50 and 70% humidity because it's very badly insulated. So we have a very, very humid house. Although now that we're having a few warmer days, the humidity is actually quite low. It was 38% this morning. In my experience, Monstera don't necessarily need higher humidity. I grow all of mine out in the living room, but then again, keep in mind, my living room is pretty humid. I have found that if you are propagating, then the higher humidity can help the plants to root faster, to grow a little bit faster, because how I imagine it, it's a little bit more lubricated for everything to come out, to slide out. But that is just, again, my interpretation, how my brain sees these things. I don't know if that is a fact. Having said that, the cuttings I'm currently growing are all out in the living room in normal room conditions. In general, I don't think they need higher humidity, but you can use higher humidity if you want your plant to grow faster or get better if it's not doing well. Okay, we're kind of back on track. Let's talk about soil next, or growing medium. I grow these mostly in a chunky soil mix. I used to mix it myself, but now I work with Soil Ninja. You can use my code PLANTWITHROSE for a discount if you want. I'll link it in the description as well. I have a little affiliate link with them, so if you use that, it also helps me. In general, it's a very chunky mix. So I have bark in there, pumice, just quite airy bits and bobs. Because the roots are really thick, and like I said before, they are epiphytes, so they don't grow in the soil, they grow on trees. You can also grow Monstera, of course, in semi-hydro, which a lot of people do. The official word is passive hydroponics, is a way to use a non-degradable medium. So that can be Pon or the semi-hydro mix by Soil Ninja or Leca, anything else that doesn't degrade over time. And then you can also, someone asked me this, can you grow them in full water, which is hydroponics? And definitely, I think you can. I've seen people grow Monstera for a long time in hydroponics. I personally don't like it because you have to think more about the nutrients that you put in the water, because in soil there is a natural blend, especially if you use Soil Ninja. They really put a lot of good healthy stuff in their mixes for your plants. In water, you have to add manually the fertilizer, the micronutrients, the macronutrients. I don't know all the words. I'm not a biologist, but you know what I mean? You have to be more mindful of what you put in. I'm sure your plant can do okay without putting all of that in, but in the long term, it would need some more nutrients. With my chunky mix, I check my plants every week to water them, and usually the Monstera are all pretty dry. I use a measuring tool, this little guy, and when it is in the red, so 1 to 3, then I water the plants. I use rainwater, but that's mainly because I have rainwater. We have quite a few rain barrels in the garden, so why not? One thing people say to do with watering is to stick your finger in the soil to feel if it's still wet or dry. For me, that doesn't really work because the pots are so big that maybe at the top it's very dry, but then at the bottom it's still very wet. So that's why I use this measuring tool. And it's actually my watering day today, so let's stick it in and see. So you have to be a little bit careful, you might touch some roots. But it says 2 right now. So I will definitely water it. Someone asked how much to water. I give them quite a lot because it's a huge pot. It is fully dry. So I just come in with my rainwater and pour it all over, not just on one side of the pot, but all over. Of course, I also want the moss to be wet. So I go a little bit like this. Now I'll let it sit. If there is a lot of water at the bottom, I definitely remove that after 5 or 10 minutes so that it's not staying in the wetness. But you can definitely let it sit there for a little bit so that it can soak up what it needs. Sometimes the soil is so dry that the water underneath just disappears. This is not the easiest process. Look at them roots. There's definitely some water at the bottom for now, but that's okay. I'm gonna leave it there. And then after filming, I'll see if I need to pour anything out. This is my yellow variegated ADANSONII, which was looking really nice. I put 2 of them on a moss pole, which I'll come to in a second. But unfortunately, it's been growing a little bit less yellow and a little bit more green. And the other ones that I showed you are mostly yellow. So that can happen with cuttings as well. Be careful when you propagate. Always let them grow out a little bit. Or if you're buying a cutting of a variegated plant, it's better to have it have at least 1 leaf already or 2. But watch the stem and where the growth point is. I'll point that out on a DELICIOSA later because it's a little bit bigger, so easier to show you. Because I quickly wanted to talk about fertilizer before we move on to moss pole talk. I fertilize all my plants in the growing season every other week. And if it's outside of the growing season, but they are actively growing because inside our house it's generally the same climate, then I will also fertilize them in winter and fall. I like to use an organic fertilizer and a liquid one. So I'm currently using Farbio, a German brand. If you want to try it out, again, you can use my code PLANTWITHROSE for a really good discount. I will link them below as well. I try to look for brands that are organic and vegan and value sustainability just like I do. And I feel like Farbio fits that. And so does Elho, by the way, if you like my planty pots. They are mostly from Elho. I forgot to say this, but I also love to use worm castings in any of my soil mixes to give that extra little boost of fertilizer. So let's move on to moss poles then, because someone also asked, is it necessary to use a moss pole? And I wouldn't say it's necessary, but it does help the plant to grow better. In this case, you can see my little ADANSONII. These are some of the fastest plants to attach to moss poles in my experience, and to root in there and just be happy. You don't really see a size increase just yet, but that can also happen. The leaves can grow bigger because they have the support. They feel like they are growing on a tree in the jungle. For this one, I'm using moss poles by an Instagram account called moss.poles. My friend Simon, who creates these and just sends you a flat pack. They are quite affordable as well. People often ask me how I get the plastic for the backing. I don't. Simon organizes all of that and I just order from them. So that is great, very handy. You just add the moss and put it together. I don't know if you can hear this. Currently it's pretty dry, so you don't need to keep your moss poles moist all the time. If you can, I think it would be better, but I don't because I don't have the time for that. I water them once a week, and if it's warm or summer, they dry out very quickly. So that's okay. The roots can dry out just like in the pot. The soil gets very dry, and that's okay, as long as you don't let it be dry for too long. So mine get watered every week or every 2 weeks, whenever I remember really. It can be a little bit annoying to put things on a moss pole because in the beginning you have a fully empty moss pole, which is of course not the best look, but I think it's worth it in the end, especially here. It looks so nice. I put 2 plants on this one, so I like to put more. If you have more plants, you can put them together on a moss pole, and it just helps them to be supported, to feel happy because they feel like they're in the jungle. And also, like Jan would say, Sydney Plant Guy, the roots that are in here are now also taking up nutrients and water and everything. So the plant, if you want to propagate it, it has a lot more potential. It doesn't even actually need the pot anymore sometimes once it's rooted into the moss pole, because the moss pole has become the pot. It's quite interesting to test that out and to just try it out, see how it works. Here, by the way, is some more browning. This is also just a yellowing leaf, but there is quite a bit of browning on the sectoral variegation, as it's called. If you don't know, the big patches of variegation, like you see here, are called sectoral variegation. Let's see if I have an example of mottled, the opposite. No, I don't. This plant only has sectoral variegation. Look at that nice leaf. Plants like the Thai constellation, but also this here, this is called mottled variegation. So it's little bits of yellow or white or pink, whatever, and then green in between, which helps them to not brown as quickly. So mottled variegation is safer if you don't want brown leaves, but I personally love the look of sectoral variegation and I think it's worth it. One more thing about yellow variegation, actually, since we are here, yellow variegation comes in as green, which is kind of confusing. Here on the oldest plant, you can see it's almost white looking. On the medium leaves, it looks beautifully yellow. And then as we go up, it starts to be less and less visible. So this one, you could even think, if you don't know, that it's fully green. But actually, do you see that there? There is variegation in there. They call it Polaroid variegation. So slowly it's coming in like a Polaroid picture would, compared to white variegation that you immediately see. So you never know once it opens. If you get practice with it, you can kind of predict how it's gonna look, but you never really know. And that's kind of also the fun of it. You have to wait and be patient. Plants definitely taught me patience. Actually, as we're talking about this, it's nice to show you my green on green Monstera, because this is the subtler version of a yellow variegated plant. It also comes in fully green, and then slowly part of the green starts to become lighter, as you maybe can see here. This is a big sectoral patch. Someone gave me these two plants because they didn't have space for them anymore and said if you give them more light, it will become lighter, the variegation, so not so subtle. This is one of the newer leaves that I have definitely seen variegation on already. It's starting to also be nice and big, which I very much enjoy. Oh, maybe some more Monstera 101. So a Monstera leaf gets fenestrations. I've already mentioned that word, but they are the side holes. I remembered it in the beginning because I speak a little bit of French, and fenêtre in French means window, and it's windows in the leaves. So that is a fenestration, and then if you're lucky and it starts sizing up more, it gets secondary fenestrations. Oh no! Oh no! I have the sticky thing on me. Shit. And in my hair. Oh no! This is chaos. Why? Okay. Okay, so this is Luna. Sorry. And here you can see the secondary fenestration. So they become little holes. And then if you're lucky, they get more and more fenestrations. And then I don't even know if they're called tertiary fenestrations anymore. Just lots of holes, which I personally think is so, so pretty. There's quite a lot to talk about with Monstera, I feel like. Luna has quite a bunch of browning leaves. I named her Luna because she used to have only half moon leaves. Keep in mind, half moon plants are not a thing. Half moon means that half of the leaf is variegated, the other half is not. But I feel like people abuse this to get more money for the plants, which I really think is ridiculous because you can never predict what the next leaf will look like. And Luna is a perfect example of that. She grew leaf after leaf, at least 6 half moon leaves. So I was like, I have a half moon plant. Yay, this is so cool. All of a sudden she stopped doing it and now it looks totally mottled like this. I mean, still beautiful. I love her, but not half moon anymore. This was the last half moon leaf. You can see that it's almost a half leaf. Most of them are now because the white has browned. But here you can still see the clear lines. And then the next leaf was this one, mottled. And then this one, and then I knew the time of half moon is over, and that's okay. It does mean that I'm gonna propagate her. Should we talk about propagation now? I'm definitely skipping things on my list. I absolutely love propagating Monstera. I'm actually just doing it again, not because I want more plants, but because I enjoy the process so much. So for Monstera and for most aroids, you need a node to propagate a plant. A node in Monstera deliciosa generally consists of a leaf, but you don't actually need a leaf to propagate. If you propagate just the stem, they call it a wet stick. A little edge around the stem like I showed you, and if you're lucky, there's an aerial root. And then a growth point, which is usually a little bit hidden inside the leaf petiole. Again, a little bit of plant 101. You have a leaf, you have the stem of the plant, and the thing that connects the leaf to the stem is called a petiole. Oh, we're stuck in a Hoya. Uh-oh, stop. Let go. If you're ever looking for how variegated a plant is, never look at the leaf or the petiole, look at the stem. If there is a variegated line in the stem, that means that it is a good plant and it's probably going to give you some nice variegation. Wow, this video is really going all over the place. So if you propagate a Monstera, you cut in the internodal spacing. Another term, you have the nodes, the space between is called an internode. That's where you cut. You can cut one node cuttings. I personally always do one node cuttings because I'm now quite confident in growing them and I know that Monstera are great propagators. My Hoya is growing against the microphone and making a noise. Actually, I used to struggle a lot with propagating them. Can you stop? There's a little tendril here that hopefully is not messing up the sound when I first started, so don't worry if you're still struggling with it. My first variegated Monstera that I bought was 50 euros and it completely died back. So the two methods that I love to do for propagation are in water, like I have here. This is just a top cutting of one of the yellow variegated ADANSONII that was not yellow at all anymore. I pulled it off the moss pole, so that's why you see some roots with moss on them, and popped it in a glass of water. Don't know if you can see, but there's already a bunch of white roots, which are the water roots. In general, I say once it gets the little side shoots like you see here, then you can move it to your medium soil or semi-hydro. I've also had a lot of success with water propagating Deliciosa Monstera. I have several videos about Monstera propagation processes. It's very fun to watch because I do updates at like 4 months to show you how it's going, how the plants are developing. The most success I've had is with air layering. So here, this is Luna again. I put a bamboo stake just to give her some support. Did I talk about support before? It doesn't have to be a moss pole. It can be a bamboo stake that you tie your plant to. I've seen people do the plants on planks thing. So you give it a plank that it can attach to, anything to give it a little bit of support. With this one, I used a bamboo stake and then pushed some moss against it first at the bottom. And then I just kept adding moss as it grew, which I think is a great method, especially when I decided I was going to propagate her. Something against the stem can help activate the aerial roots quicker, and if you have good aerial roots, then you can propagate quicker. Another thing I like to do is once there is an aerial root, it usually grows straight to the side, which is kind of hilarious. I then start to, when it's still soft, bend it a little bit down, add some moss to it, and tie the little tie wraps. These are plant Velcro. I have them linked in my description as well if you want to use that. And guide the root down to the soil. I actually just did that with one that kept, every day you'll see it lengthening a little bit and then you tie it again. So slowly you're guiding it to the soil. Once it's in the soil and rooted, it makes it so much easier for the cutting to then thrive because it's already rooted. If you don't know, top cuttings of plants are the hardest to grow. Top cuttings of Monstera deliciosa. So if you are new to Monstera, I wouldn't recommend buying a top cutting unless it's already rooted. Then it's awesome. But in general, they are much slower to root, so it's much riskier for them to rot before they root. The benefit to them, however, is once they start to grow, immediately they'll have nice sized leaves. With a stem cutting, it has to start from scratch, so usually you get a little profil first, which is a tiny little misshapen point thing that looks a little bit like a leaf sometimes, and then the leaves start coming out and hopefully sizing up quickly, especially if you have a thick stem already. Let's go back to the green on green variegated one. You can actually find this in garden centers. So some people go sport variegation hunting, as it's called, which basically means that you go into shops or wherever plants are sold, looking at normal plants, so non-variegated plants, in the hunt for some variegation. And I think that's what sport variegation means. I'm not 100% sure. So this one, you can see hopefully a little bit. This one is the clear variegated one. Here below, there is some all over, but because it's mottled, it's a little bit harder to see. And then the newest one here. This one doesn't show any variegation, but actually for me that's okay because I didn't own a regular DELICIOSA Monstera anymore, a green one. So I'm happy to have that. Here you can see it again quite nicely. So one thing that we haven't talked about is with Monstera DELICIOSA, there are different names for it. Some people will say elbow, which just means white, and that can be used for a variegated plant. I don't think it's an official term. If you want to say it correctly, it's Monstera DELICIOSA variegata, but elbow everyone uses, especially I feel like in the English language. Then another thing is borsegiana. You may have heard that word. It is actually an old word which doesn't mean anything. It's not an official term. It was used synonymously with Monstera DELICIOSA, but people somehow made it mean something that it's not. With Monstera DELICIOSA, you have two forms. You have the large form and the small form. And people were using borsegiana for small form, but officially you say small form or large form. Most of the Monstera that we own are small form, except for Thai constellations, they are large form. You can definitely find some large forms. It doesn't necessarily mean a small form doesn't get big, because my small forms definitely have big leaves. The distinction, apparently people can see it from the shape of the leaf. It's also said that large form has shorter internodes. You can definitely see that with my Thai constellation. They're very, very close together. And it is said that only large form get the ruffles on the petioles, but I've definitely seen the start of some ruffles on my small form as well. But all of those are a little bit weird. I've recently heard one that is definitely very clear and that I can use myself without having to ask experts, and that has to do with the petiolar sheath. Are you still with me? We have the petiole that connects the leaf to the stem. The sheath is where the new leaf comes out. Some plants change between a petiolar sheath and a cataphyll. From what I know, Monstera always grow from a petiolar sheath, and that means that from the petiole of the previous leaf, the new leaf emerges, and it leaves these two little open flaps, the part where the new leaf has slid out of. With a small form Monstera, the petiolar sheath reaches more than half of the petiole. With a large form, it is actually much shorter, sometimes even only 1/3. And that was one thing that I can definitely easily tell apart. So if we look at Luna or FERRY, who are both small forms, I've learned from this method, is that the petiolar sheath reaches all the way to here, and then here is the leaf. These ones are also quite clear to see. The petiolar sheath reaches to here. Do you see how much of the petiole that is? Only this part doesn't have it. Then if we look at Thais or my green on green variegated Monstera, this is where the leaf is, and the petiolar sheath reaches only to here. Do you see the difference? That for me was the first easy to recognize tip to tell them apart. In general, it doesn't really matter if it's small form or large form. The only thing that is different is that a large form generally doesn't need a support. With small form, the internodes can be super long, especially if your plant gets a little bit less light. That's just my theory though, and I think it also has to do with genes. This is a plant by my friend Jess. For mine, you'll see they are quite short even for small form because I think I blast them with light. This is just my theory, but small form definitely benefits from a support. Now I'm gonna move you because I'm gonna show you some of the bigger plants. By the way, did you notice something different about my face? I'm wearing contact lenses. Testing it out. My eyes generally hate contact lenses. This is Thais, my Thai constellation. I hope you can hear me. I have to stand so far away because he's so big. He is incredible! I love him so much. I got him as a mature plant already, not as big as it is now. Then I cut him into 3 or 4 pieces and sold them, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And then it took 8 months for a new leaf to come out. So if you are growing Thai constellation, it is not fun, but normal that new leaves can take really, really long. It currently has about 8 leaves. And what I love about this one is why I picked him is because the sectoral variegation in there. If you don't know, Thai constellation are genetically created, tissue cultured. I don't know exactly how that works, but they always have this variegation. So with regular variegated Monstera, they can lose the variegation or they can go fully variegated. With Thai constellation, it's called stable variegation. instead of unstable variegation. So it never goes away, which is fun. And it has this mottled look in general. That is why it's called a Thai constellation. But I got to pick one that had sectoral variegation as well. So I got the best of both worlds, in my opinion. Having said that, it definitely means there is some browning on the leaves here. As you can see, this is almost half white and all the tips are quite brown. To me, that is fine. I don't mind it at all. If you want to cut the brown off, by the way, you can, but I recommend doing it so a tiny bit of brown stays on it, because you don't want to cut into the healthy part of the leaf and make the browning process go quicker. Just like with cutting your nails, actually, you don't want to cut into the living tissue, you just cut on the edge of the dead tissue. So I hope that comparison helps. If we look here at my Thai constellation stem, it is reaching the end of the pot. So I'm going to be repotting actually all of my big plants in the windowsill very soon. One person asked, Thai constellation crawling or climbing? And I think both work because it is a large form. It doesn't need support. But I did notice that mine was just growing right to the end of the pot. So I've since moved it, repotted it like I was talking about, to have a little pole here, which is not necessarily a moss pole giving it like aerial root growth and everything, but it is just giving it a little bit of support, guiding it upwards, because I have more space in my house upwards than I do horizontally, if that makes sense. Mickey wants some attention too. Both can work, but I'm currently trying climbing. Mickey's being adorable. One person asked if I own a Monstera obliqua. And I do. This was gifted to me by a friend as a wet stick. So all the leaves that it has grew in my care. And I was really surprised at how fast it sized up. So the first leaf was very small. It's browning now. Then we had this one with no holes in it yet. And then the next one already had a bunch of holes. And the next one got even bigger with more holes. And there's a new leaf on the way here. Since editing is taking quite a long time, the new leaf has opened. Here it is. And it is even bigger than the previous one. I love it so much. So it's still very, very small, but I actually enjoy growing plants from small to big. It's kind of extra cool. So yes, I own Monstera obliqua. This is the Peruvian form. There are many other forms. I don't own any of those anymore. The last one to show you is FERRY, my big Monstera deliciosa variegata, small form. This is FERRY! I thought maybe it's a large form because it got it from someone who had it as a green plant, but it's definitely a small form if we look at the petiolar sheath. This currently is 4 plants in the pot, but the main leaves that you see are all from 2 plants. The mother plant, the base of the plant, grew very fast. That is this side with these super white leaves. Look at that, there's only a tiny bit of green on that, but 0 signs of browning yet. This whole side, it's almost blown out. I have to adjust my light settings to show you properly. And then on this side, it did have a little bit more green. That is why this plant is still happy. There is a lot of white, but it also has enough green to survive. If the plant would be all leaves like this, then it likely wouldn't be very happy, wouldn't be growing very fast. On the other side here, I have the top cutting that also has grown really well. You can see, can you tell them apart? Not really. This is the top leaf of the top cutting. And then this whole side is all top cutting. Then back here we have a little baby.
It's just a baby.
This leaf and this leaf. That is the small one on this side. The other one, I can't even show you. Shit. Because it is a very small one right in here. Can you see this leaf? It has one more leaf here that it doesn't want to focus on right now. With the big repot, I actually removed this plant. So now you can see it a little bit better. This was the original leaf. It has 3 leaves, but very small compared to the other ones. This is the latest one. I have put it on its separate moss pole, so it can hopefully grow a little bit bigger and happier. Ooh, and look at that pot from Piece of Clay. The stem is actually growing away from the moss pole. It's always fun when that happens. You plant them all on the moss pole and then we're like, no thank you, going the other direction. This is so heavy, it's kind of hard. But okay, here, can you see all these roots? They're growing next to or through the moss pole, straight to the other side. That is why I like the moss poles by Simon. There's a little bit of plastic that guides them down. This one is a round one, so Sorry. So plants can grow on all sides, which I do like a lot, but they seem to not attach as much to it. Monstera deliciosa especially are not very obedient. Not like philodendron on a moss pole. They're like, oh sure, I'll go down here, that's great. Monstera deliciosa are like, you know that song by Rage Against the Machine? Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me! Yeah, that is what they do. But I'm very happy with Ferry, especially because he's now a little bit more bushy. I grew him out from a one node, one leaf rooted cutting that I got from someone. And before I did the big chop, it was just one plant growing up. Now it's definitely a very, very full pot. Okay, I'm gonna pop him back because he's heavy. Let's talk about pests next. The main pests that I've struggled with on my Monstera are thrips. It seems that thrips really, really love the taste of Monstera, and they are one of the worst pests that I've had to deal with. I work with Entocare to treat pests, and for thrips, they offer these little baggies that are mites that attack the smaller stages of thrips, so the larvae and stuff. And then I also use their product Predatrip, which is predatory thrips, to attack the adult thrips in my house. I've also had a little bit of scale on one of them, but that's quite easy to treat in my opinion. Maybe I shouldn't say that out loud. They'll come back. And some of the mealybugs also sit on them because the Hoya are nearby, but I think they love the taste of Hoya more. I don't know exactly. But from my experience, the main thing to look out for is thrips. They absolutely suck. I have a lot of videos about how I treat them. If you're in the Netherlands or around here, you can also get them from Entocare. If you're on the other side of the world, then I recommend looking locally because you don't want to ship live bugs halfway around the world. That's not good for them or the environment. One other thing to think about with Monstera, especially the ADANSONII, is viruses. Unfortunately, many of the ones that have been grown here in the Netherlands have mosaic virus. I have thrown away my ADANSONII, my green ADANSONII that I had before because it had mosaic virus. I'm not at all an expert about viruses and diseases and bacterial infections and all that stuff, because luckily I haven't had many of it. I've had it, like I said, on my ADANSONII, so I threw it away. And that's kind of where my dislike for ADANSONII came from, because I loved that plant before. So if you are buying an ADANSONII, especially from a garden center, keep an eye on what the leaves look like. Also, philodendron varicosums from here can have iffy looking leaves, so definitely keep an eye out for that, because mosaic virus can easily spread if you have, for example, thrips. They suck one leaf, then they suck another plant's leaf, and they spread the virus like that. I just wanted to include root rot that you can get and happy roots. For Monstera, happy roots are pretty thick and either brown or white, and then they get little side shoots like this. If you spot something like this, the outer, there's like an outer thing, I think it's called a filament, I'm not quite sure, and then an inner thing. The inner thing is the actual root, but once the outer thing is away, then it means that the root is dead. This has rotted, unfortunately, so you can chop that just in the healthy part, and then it's going to be okay again. People also asked if you could cut the aerial roots. You can definitely cut them, but I don't. I like to guide them back down into the pot. I think I've mentioned that already, because that definitely gives your plant a lot more happiness and stability, as you can see here. But if they are completely in the way or there's a tan, you can definitely cut them off, cut them short or cut them all the way off, whatever you want. They can start to regrow from the ends, like this one has, but this has been in soil. There's nothing wrong with it, I would say, but I personally wouldn't, because the plant worked to grow them and I don't want to cut off what he worked to grow. Does that make sense? Okay, back to the video. Two more things I want to talk to you about. One is pot size. I've already kind of showed you how big my pots are. Here you can see Luna, who definitely is ready for a repot. You can see it being very, very filled with roots. I didn't do that sooner because she was making a new leaf. If you repot while it has a new leaf emerging, it can definitely damage the new leaf, which I wanted to avoid, because look how beautiful that is. So now that it's almost hardened off, it is much safer to repot and keep that leaf happy. I know certain people say that aroids and Monstera want to be root bound. From my experience, that is not necessarily the case. I'm not saying put them in a huge tub, but definitely if it looks like this, I'm going to increase the size quite a bit on either side so it has space to root again. Keep in mind, after repotting, sometimes the plant takes a while before it grows again because it had some stress, but also I think it focuses on growing roots again before it grows another leaf. So that's good to know if you are impatient. But it's definitely worth it, because once it does start to grow again, the leaves will grow bigger, the plant will be happier. Root porn, look at that. So nice. The last thing to talk about is Monstera flowers. because I've never had them flower, and actually a flower is not called a flower with aroids, with most aroids. It is an inflorescence, which is a flower structure. Like I said, I'm not a botanist or an expert. I personally don't necessarily want my Monstera to flower, but it might be fun to know Monstera deliciosa is called deliciosa, delicious, because of the fruits. So if you do get a flower and you get it pollinated, it can create a fruit that is edible and apparently delicious, unless it's not ripe yet, and then it is toxic, so be careful. If you haven't seen Crystal trying a Monstera deliciosa fruit, it is a very, very cool, fun video to watch on her Instagram and TikTok and everything, so check that out. Myself, I've only seen a flower and a fruit at a botanical garden, and I haven't tasted it. But apparently it's deliciosa, so I think that's it for this video. If you want to see me propagate Luna, that will be a separate video, and the repotting will also be a separate video. If you have any questions left, please leave them in the comments below. I will get to them there. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and a big thank you to my patrons and YouTube members. If you want, you can join that crew on Patreon or YouTube. You'll get a monthly Zoom call with me and a private Discord chat as well. It's really, really fun. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week. Bye, friends!